I didn't even see the countdown. Okay. Hey, everyone. We are live. It went from connecting to we are here to, oh no, we're 5 seconds in. So, hey, everyone. Backstage, Vlad, Sean, and I were talking about Google podcasts being shut down, and Vlad still hanging on to his 8-year-old Google phone is absolutely in love with Google Podcasts. So if you are the one of the other like 7 users who is actually using Google Podcasts on an Android platform, please let Vlad know the listener that you guys are using, because that will absolutely 100% help him. Having said that, if you guys are new here, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Super excited to go ahead and kick off the month of August. We've got a couple of one-off episodes coming up. We've got a couple of things towards the end of the month where we're changing things around due to vacation and everything else. So this will be super fun. If you guys have thoughts, questions, comments, please feel free to go drop them down below. Sean Dotson, who we'll introduce in just a second, has been on a couple of times. If you guys have questions for Sean or for myself or for Vlad, please go ahead and let us know. We will do our very best to go ahead and get to them. And if they magically show up on our restream, which is like I don't know, like a 3 and 5 at this point comments, semi-randomly show up, we will go ahead and show them. Or if you guys have questions, we will go ahead and ask those questions as we go about doing this. Without further ado, everyone officially welcome to Manufacturing Hub episode 174. My name is Dave. This guy up here is Vlad. We'd like to officially welcome, I suppose, I'm not even sure you need an introduction at this point, Sean, but we'd like to officially welcome Sean Dotson back to the podcast. Sean, thanks for joining us again.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
No, I think it's going to be a great conversation, Sean. Again, I think you have been on the podcast before. We had a lengthy introduction from you, but maybe for those who are not familiar with what you have accomplished and ultimately how did you get into manufacturing, automation, robotics, could you give us a reintroduction? And I know you also are celebrating a small milestone, which we can discuss as well towards the end. But what are you up to today? What have you been up to? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think most people know my background, but just for those who don't, mechanical engineer, did a lot of robotics work in college, got out of college and went to work for a packaging company and then very quickly for an automation company. Kept getting bought by larger and larger companies. Finally, they shut our facility down. They had too many facilities all over the world. I moved products all over the world and then decided like, hey, I got to get another job now. And I said, well, I know automation, so why don't I just start an automation company? So I got 2 of my top engineers to kind of come along with me, and we formed R&D Automation down in Florida, and started out with just 3 guys, the smallest of the small, and over about an 18-year period, did a couple acquisitions: machine shop, a panel shop, a medical device and consumer product packaging company. Built it up to about a little over 60 employees and sold it to private equity firm about 3.5 years ago now. Stayed on with them for a couple of years doing M&A and doing kind of high-level CTO and still CEO of R&D work. And then just shy of about 2 years ago, decided that it was time to move on, and took a little bit of time off, but now I'm doing a lot of advisory work, sitting on boards, working with private equity, working with venture capital, helping them identify, industrial targets, helping doing some business coaching, helping some manufacturers automate. So kind of doing a little bit of everything. I get, interested in lots of things. So that's kind of my background.
Sean, really curious, and I know we could probably spend, hours dissecting what it takes to build an industrial integrator. I'm curious maybe on the early days, because I certainly get a lot of questions of, highly skilled technical people looking maybe to start their own company. I'm curious maybe what that dynamic was like, and maybe some, how to say it, like words of advice or words of wisdom for someone who's maybe looking in that direction at this time.
Well, I used to tease people, like when they said they wanted to get into industrial automation, I said, do something easy like brain surgery or alligator wrestling. It's not an easy industry to get into. You could be very technical. I know some amazing engineers who have tried to go out, on their own. You really need to be sure that either you or maybe one of your partners has that skill set though of being a salesperson, right? And I always said I'm kind of the world's most reluctant salesperson, but unfortunately I'm good at it. So that was I think the most important thing was I was able to go out and talk to customers and convince them to give us a chance when we were young and early. And I relied really on a lot of the work that we did back at our previous company and saying like, look, this is what we did for that company, for Adlin Automation, Jibo, Seidel. We kept changing names. It's the same guys, right? Yes, we don't have the backing of this big company, but these are the people who did all this work. And they weren't giving us their $1 million jobs. They were giving us their, $25, $35, $40,000 jobs in the very, very beginning. And then we'd be successful with those. And then we work our way up to larger and larger jobs till we were, towards the end, we were doing multi-million-dollar, work cells. So I'd say, the most important thing is you got to have a network of potential customers. Probably if you're looking at doing this on your own, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of a side hustle for a little while to maybe build up some of that, working at night, maybe building panels at night, doing some programming at night, things like that, until you're ready to really leap into it, and then be prepared, quite honestly, to not make a paycheck, not make any money for probably a good 6 to 9 months. You need to have a nest egg built. I don't think we took a paycheck for at least 6 months, probably closer to 9 months when we first started the company. And then even then, it was a very small paycheck.
Was that because you were reinvesting, or was that just, I guess, the nature of the business?
Nature of the beast, the way the cash flow works, right? So when you're building equipment, you're outlaying all this money, for materials and for subcontract, because it was just 3 of us at the time. So we were subcontracting out panel builds, and we were even subcontracting out some of the programming, things like that. So you're having to outlay all this cash. Well, there's not a lot of cash sitting around until you get the final payment. That's kind of your profit. That's it, right? Well, but then you got the next job. So you're taking that profit and you're reinvesting it into the next job to buy the materials. And yes, over time, the profit is outweighing the next projects, otherwise you wouldn't be profitable. However, it takes time to build that up. I'd say it takes a good couple years to really build up enough of a cushion that you can really start taking what I consider a fair salary.
Gotcha. I do want to follow up with, there's a question in the comments, which is, what are your thoughts on learning building automation in comparison to manufacturing automation? And I want to maybe expand that just a little bit, because I think there's just so many areas that you can focus on. Some of the examples could be robotics, traditional PLC controls, maybe then sort of higher levels. So I think there's a lot of options. Any thoughts on how you would approach choosing, besides, if that's what you're comfortable with, and just sort of go with that? Would you maybe select something a bit more specific at this time?
I guess it depends if you're talking about on a personal level or on a business, a company level. So on a personal level, I think you need to be very broad. So a lot of the same applications, a lot of the same, learning techniques, automation techniques can be applied to both manufacturing and, when they say building, I'm assuming they mean construction. So, you've got PLCs, you've got robots, you've got actuators, you've got pneumatics and things like that. So that goes across the board. So from a personal level, I don't think you really need to specialize in one or the other. Now, if you're talking about from a company, yes, absolutely. I don't think that you could be super successful trying to do construction automation and medical device, right? They're 2 very different fields. I'm a firm believer that to be successful as a automation company, you need to have a couple, 1 to 2 niches that you're really, really good at. My old company was medical device, consumer products, and what I call industrial goods, like hydraulic valves and clutches and gears, and any kind of industrial type mechanisms, right? We really didn't do a lot of automotive. We didn't do food and beverage. We didn't do palletizing because there are other people that's what they specialized in. So that being said, yes, from a company standpoint, you got to kind of pick one or the other. Now, can I say going into construction automation is a good thing? I think it's pretty young. There's not a lot of it out there. We're seeing more and more. It's probably a growing field. But again, I think you got to find a niche even within construction, because you've got, I mean, how many different processes? You've got concrete, and you've got wood, and you've got roofing tiles, you've got drywall and painting, and you might need to kind of pick one of those subcategories and really focus, on one or two of those maybe.
Yeah, look, I would say like focusing is important. That's I think that's a weakness we all have, at least speaking for myself, maybe.
Yeah.
But it certainly is, a question of going broad at the beginning and then figuring out just kind of where the customers come
Yeah.
from, and then
Mhm.
sort of refocusing on a core. But
Yeah.
it's a tough question, right? Because
I mean,
it's
as a young company, I mean, I'll be honest, you've got to be able to say yes to almost anything just to survive. I mean, we did,
Mhm.
Um, it also gets you in trouble too, though. There were times that we take on a job and we're like, why did we take this job on? This is not what we do. But you learn from that, and then you learn probably next time, maybe we shouldn't have taken on that job. And then you kind of naturally narrow your focus that way.
Yep.
I do see some established companies though out there still kind of just taking on anything that comes their way, and I honestly think that's a mistake, because I think sometimes they think, well, we need the work. Yeah, but if you take job A, which is really not in your wheelhouse, I guarantee you 3 weeks from now, job B is going to come along, which is in your wheelhouse, and you'll be like, oh, like, why did we take job A? Right. So,
Dave, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. I would agree with all of the comments that Sean has, and I would tell Super Mackin on YouTube that if you're interested, we actually had an episode number 128 with Bill Rainier and Truck Ridgeway. And Bill has done a bunch of really interesting applications that are more on the consumer, or more on like the building side, with a number of kind of all-in-ones and other more industrial hardware that you might be interested in taking a listen to if you are kind of to that point and interested to go ahead and take a look at that. But to Sean's most recent point, I would 100% agree. And I was laughing when he says how sometimes he sees a bunch of older, who should be more experienced companies go and take on a project that is kind of just outside of what they would be normally comfortable with. And I 100% agree. When you're young and you need the money in order to make payroll, sometimes you have to take jobs and go learn your lessons. Sometimes they're lessons and you want to move towards them. Sometimes they're lessons and you take your lumps, and hopefully there's another better job on the back end of that is more closer to what you are looking for. But I would say overall, the ability to kind of focus and figure out what you're good at and continue to go take jobs, and the ability to say no to jobs. I feel like Sean was completely correct at the beginning when he said someone in an organization has to be able to go talk to customers to get them to say yes and to get them to give you your money. But someone also in there needs to be able to say, hey, this is so far outside of what we normally would do, or it's not the right job for us. We should say no. And I would almost say, especially for younger companies, and I've worked with a number of them, the ability to say, hey, someone is offering us this $20 or $40 or $200,000 purchase order, but we should really say no, because it's going to only cause more problems for us. That is something that is very uncommon, especially for smaller organizations, almost regardless of the length of time that they've been part of. And I would say that is a huge mistake that I see over and over again. I worked with a group a number of years ago, and they took a job that was just a little bit outside, and they're like, hey, we'll go dip our toes in robotics. And I think the $500,000 or $800,000 job ended up netting them like $200,000 of loss, because they just couldn't get there. They couldn't get to the point of being able to ship, and they got to the point of, we basically have to go pay other people, or we've got to send our people to a bunch of training, and we've got all these overruns, and because of all these overruns, it's costing us money. And so some groups tend to learn that lesson much more often than other more successful groups.
Yeah, I had a salesman who worked for me for a number of years, and he always had all these great, wise adages, and one of his was always, the only thing worse than no business is bad business. And it really makes, it's really true when you think about it. There's times where, no, we don't have any business, but if we take this business, we're actually going to lose money, versus not gaining money. So
Yes.
chase the right things.
Absolutely. So I want to go dive into that business and kind of dive into what you think opportunities look like a little bit more. But before that, I want to go talk a little bit broader, a little bit more about kind of the happenings of the industry. And so, Sean, I think the last time you were on, you had just exited your company, so you've had a year or thereabouts to kind of go look at everything, which is probably interesting, which is probably eye-opening. Can you tell us your thought on the state of robotics and industrial robotics and kind of everything that you've seen maybe today versus in the past, and what you think what you think the future is going to become?
Yeah, it's a big topic. So let's see here. We were kind of just coming out of the pandemic. When I exited, we were past it, but we still had the little rumblings. We still had some supply chain issues, and we were just kind of exiting it. What I saw, what everybody saw, during the pandemic was this gigantic shoot up of need for automation. Right, all these companies basically said, look, we can't afford to have our factories shut down. We can't afford to not have people. We need to reshore. We can't have supply chain issues. So they spent a massive amount of money. And it taught me a couple things. One is, pretty much every automation company worth their salt was 2 to 3 years of backlog. I mean, we had more work. People were turning down work. We were. I know other people were too, which is a good thing to do. We could turn down the work we really didn't want, or it wasn't in our wheelhouse, and focus on the things that we were good at. But we still had 2-year, 3-year backlogs.
Yeah.
That was just a couple year blip. That showed me that if this country really truly wants to start automating, we need 2 to 3 more the number of automation companies. Like we don't have enough. If another pandemic happens, or another geopolitical issue happens, and we all decide, we got to we're really going to go back to automating again, we're going to be back to 2 to 3 year lead times on everything, and that's just not quick enough. So it just shows me there's not enough automation going on in the United States. There's not enough automation companies right now to handle that excess. Now, at the same time, that demand has fallen way off. Some of these manufacturers have had some short-term memory loss, perhaps, of how painful it was, and they've decided that we're just going to throw people at the problem, or we're going to put off spending until after the election, or whatever excuse they have. Now there's automation companies out there that are looking for work, and there's some of them are struggling. So it's this very cyclical. Too much work, not enough work. Too much work, not enough work. We got to figure out how to smooth that out. And I think part of that is by getting to market faster. We have, lead times are far too long on equipment for manufacturers. And trust me, I've been on the opposite side where a customer's like, what do you mean it's going to take a year? I'm like, yeah, it's custom. It's going to take a year to build. But I get their point. It's like waiting a year for a piece of equipment is a long time, especially when they look at it like, oh, I just go buy a Haas and I can get one of those in, 4 to 6, 8 weeks maybe, right? Why can't I get one of your systems? I think standardization is important there, is coming up with some more standardized pieces of automation that you can deliver quicker and get into customers' hands a little bit quicker. And part of that will be helped by the ability to, low code, no code robotics, low code, no code PLC, just any kind of tools, camera tools that are easier to use, anything that doesn't require you to go send one of your engineers to training for, or doesn't require a third-party expert to come in. If you can take, a junior engineer and they can figure out how to program this robot within, a few days, that's going to speed up your time to market, right? So we're seeing those tools, kind of started in the cobot world, but now it's spreading into the industrial robot world. It's starting to take off a little bit on controllers, and I'm not going to even say PLCs, because now we've got industrial PCs and then industrial Raspberry Pi type controllers and things like that. But we're starting to see a little bit more drag and drop type programming, which all the old ladder logic guys are like, no, I'm never going to give up ladder logic. Well, yeah, eventually you're going to have to give up ladder logic. I'm sorry. One day it's going to happen. Maybe not soon, but one day it will happen. So I think we're starting to see ease of use be important, right? You don't want to have all these different protocols and have to figure out how to make all these protocols. People want to be able to plug it in, fire up a GUI graphical programming system, do a little bit, and it just works. So I think that's going to continue to be a trend in the automation industry.
Let me ask you, Sean, if I may, maybe a follow-up on that side, because I think, the people that I talk to are still unable to solve the people problem. And what I mean by that is, beyond the delays of, let's call it hardware, whether that's, robotics, PLCs, or other control systems equipment, I feel like the end users don't have enough capacity to execute on those projects, right? There's just not enough like control systems engineers, robotics engineers, and I think whether we like it or not, the current state of the industry is that it is fairly difficult to get up to speed if you have, let's call it even a software background or like an electrical engineering background. So I'm curious, maybe like what you're seeing on that side, and have we truly like solved any of those problems going forward? Because I see a lot of conversations that universities should maybe introduce better mechatronics programs, but I don't know if I see the things actually being done. So I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Wow, I got a lot of thoughts on that. I'm not seeing. I'm seeing a little bit of progress in some ways on the simplification of control systems, but not to a huge degree. I really think there is a need to make these things simpler, and I really think we can make them simpler. I quite frankly, I think some of the larger players like Rockwell and Siemens, and I mean you can even say Omron. I mean they're a minor player, but still, I mean the big 5 or 6 that are out there. I don't think they don't see a need to really make this simpler, right? They have a dominant market position. People use their products. They have a lot of people who know their products. So what is their impetus to make them simpler to use? I think what's going to happen is the younger generation coming in. When we had a bunch of interns at R&D over the years. What I call Gen Z, and even whatever's the next Gen Alpha, digital natives, what do they call the next generation? Just starting to get some of those kids in, and they would look at stuff like ladder logic, and they're like, "What is this? Like, this is the most archaic thing I've ever seen. Why aren't you programming in Python? Why aren't you programming in Rust? Why aren't you using all these tools? I don't want to learn that." So I think they want to be able to do it on their phone or an iPad, right? They don't want to lug out one of these, our old 60-pound laptops that that most controls guys have. I think that might be finally the turning point, is where if enough of the younger generation just says like, no, we're not going to do this. We're going to use these other tools. There are better tools. Maybe they'll change. In the meantime, you mentioned, education systems. I'm a firm believer, and I work with University of Florida, where I went, and I work with another local university here in Sarasota. I'm a firm believer that the engineering degree curriculum needs to change, and I'm talking about a 4 to 5 year engineering degree, not a tech school. It really needs to be a little more like the tech school, though. I've seen people come out with no background whatsoever in machining. And I'm not saying you have to be a machinist, but you need to have a concept of what a CNC can and cannot do, what a mill can and cannot do. How many times you see somebody makes a square pocket in a plate, right? Okay, guys, you can do that, but it costs a lot of money to make a square pocket, right? You need to put put fillets in the corner. Just have a hands-on lab where you've got a CNC, and you maybe it's part of your machine design course where you design a part and then you learn how to machine it. I took, I don't know, it was like 2 or 3 semesters of heat transfer and 3 semesters of fluid dynamics and 2 of HVAC, and how much of that stuff I've used? Almost none. If I wanted to go design a jet engine, then yeah, I need all that. But chances are I probably also went to go get my master's in that to go design that jet engine, right? So I think a lot of those higher level courses, quite honestly, need to be pushed off towards the master's level, but get a little bit more of those hands-on courses where you learn maybe some basic PLC programming, some basic electron. I mean, I took one circuits lab. It was so minor that it really, I mean, I was a mechanical engineer, so I only took one, but still, it was so surface level. It really didn't teach me that much. I learned all of that on the job, right? And I just think it would help a lot if students came in with a little bit more of those hands-on skill sets.
Look, I had a very similar experience as an electrical engineer, and I think I've told this story even on the podcast a couple of times. I've never heard of PLCs up until, I started interviewing. I didn't know what a PLC was. I didn't know that manufacturing was even a career choice for electrical engineers. And I think that I truly don't know who is to push into those programs to have them maybe change the curriculums, as you've mentioned. But you're right that a lot of engineers graduate with a whole lot of theoretical knowledge, which I think, again, like if you go into like very specific like design elements make sense. But again, and I think I made this post on LinkedIn not too long ago, to graduate electrical engineering with never having soldered, a PCB, just I think doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Especially when they're $5 a piece, and you usually have a lab in the university where you can go and get that done. But anyways, I definitely agree. But like I said, I think my point is still I don't see a whole lot of change, but I see a lot of, how to say, like complaining that it should change. So, but I don't know which uh, body or governing board, or if it's end users that should be advocating more. I again, I'm not trying to blame or point fingers.
No, of course. But it is frustrating, though. I sat on the board of our local Sarasota manufacturing organization, and we would always have all the local schools, mainly trade schools, tech schools, come in, but even high schools too. It's like, what do we need to be teaching our kids so that you manufacturers will hire them? And we would tell them, you need this skill, all these skills, right? And then a year would go by, and then they'd present their curriculum, and it really hadn't changed. And they'd say, like, okay, so what do you guys want for your, like, well, we told you last year, this is what we want. We would tell them again. And then it might change a little bit, but it was just inching forward so slow. So I'm not sure if it's they weren't listening or they didn't have the power to change. I mean, maybe there were state government issues that they, red tape they couldn't get through. Who knows? But I just think as an engineering community, all engineers, whether we're industrial or manufacturing or electrical or whatever, we need to be pushing our schools to, produce kids with a little bit more, hands-on work. Somebody, maybe it was you, Vlad. Somebody posted the other day, like, what skills or what would you give to kids, going into engineering? And my answer was, get your hands dirty, right? So if the school doesn't force you to do it, go do it yourself. There's usually extracurricular programs. Like at UF, we had, a race car program. We had self-guiding vehicle programs. And I remember, the civil engineers had a bridge building, program that, build the bridge out of the lightest materials possible, that sort of thing. Go get your hands dirty and go learn something the hard way. That's really my advice is, if the school won't force you to do it, then you need to do it on your own. Because when I look at a resume and he went to school and that's all he did, or he went to school, but he also built his own 3D printer, or she built his own 3D printer, or they built their own, race car, or they, we hired an intern that actually built their own Scara robot by 3D printing parts and belts. And did all the kinematics and everything. And I'm like, the kid was a genius, right? That's the type of employee I want.
And I would say that is usually 10 times more impressive at an interview than, just a list of courses. Because at the end of the day, all the kids are going to graduate with the same list.
Exactly.
And to stand apart, like, I think you need to go a little bit above and beyond. But again, that's just, my opinion. Moving us along, I don't want to dwell too much on the education side, because that could also be a very long conversation. Maybe other kind of technologies in the industry. I know that there's a lot of conversations around specifically AI, machine learning. I think we see a lot more of that on trade shows. I think people are experimenting, whether that's integrating that into robotics, machine vision, or data processing. any like thoughts and maybe even like interesting applications? I certainly like to talk to companies who are trying things, but I remain fairly skeptical of
Mhm.
a lot of what's coming out.
Well, I mean, I think we all know that, probably we'll be conservative and say 90% of the stuff that's labeled as AI is not AI. It's a bunch of if-then statements, right? Um, I think the areas that probably truly are AI enabled in industrial automation is more so in the vision side, which we've been doing for a number of years. There was a company called Vidi that Cognex bought, I don't know, probably 8-10 years ago, maybe. And theirs was a machine learn. I don't think they called it AI 8 to 10 years ago, but it was machine learning, and you basically would just show it, this is good, this is good, this is good, this is bad, this is bad, and you didn't say why it was good or bad. You just showed it an image of the good and bad parts, and it figured out, oh, well, this one's got a little piece sticking out of it, and that's bad, and it doesn't, it's good, okay, and it learned, and it's surprisingly very, it didn't take a lot of models, to teach this, and then it got better as you went through and said, well, you got that one wrong, this is actually a good part, not a bad part, and it would relearn. So we're seeing that a lot in vision, because I think that's a perfect example. Taking an image, analyzing an image, and then telling what is the difference between these images. That's a machine learning, aspect. When they talk about these robotic enabled AI, quite honestly, I think it's a robot that's controlled by an AI enabled camera. Typically, is what we're really talking about. To my knowledge, we're not putting AI into PLCs. We're putting AI into robot controllers. It's not happening right now. Now, you may
I'm
have
sure we
some.
will try.
We'll try. Oh yeah. And somebody will claim it's AI robots, right? But there's third party. There's companies out there that are developing third party, industrial PC solutions that are looking at optimizing palletizing and things like that. That it probably has some machine learning, in there, because it's to me, it's anytime you're improving the model on the fly, yeah, that's machine, or not even on the fly necessarily. You're collecting data, improving the model, collecting data, improving the model. That, yeah, I can consider that, AI. If you're just running calculations, nah, that's not really AI. So there's some guys out there that are developing some of those to figure out, okay, what's the best way to build this mixed unit palette? Because you've got all these different dimensions, and you're sorting through all these things and figuring out the optimal way to build this thing. And okay, yeah, I'll give you that. That's probably some machine learning, right? So again, it's a lot of buzzwords. A lot of companies out there are hyping it up. Inspection is definitely something that's going to benefit from that. Again, when you can just start showing different images, there's a company out there right now that's looking at inspection, and you basically give them a handful, a dozen different products, and then basically you tell them, hey, look, they could be, from this big to this big, and here's some attributes that can change and attributes that don't change. And then what they'll do is they actually generate 1 million, models, theoretical models of that particular product. So let's just say it's like a strawberry, they generate 1 million different, forms of this strawberry and sort it into like good strawberries and bad strawberries. And then they put it into their system. And now they'll be able to, as they come by, determine, hey, what's a good and a bad strawberry, even though they never saw 1 million good and bad strawberries. They only saw a dozen.
Also, they're
and
like
then
seeding not like fake data, but generated data into
it's
the.
generated data, exactly. So obviously, a strawberry is going to be about that big, right? You're never going to be, a strawberry this big. So they said, hey, it's going to be from this big to this big, and hey, here's one that's got a little lump on it, and that's maybe a bad one. If this lump is gets too big, we don't want that strawberry because it doesn't look nice. And so they give it some parameters and kind of tweak it, but they're on a very small sample. They're able to put a pretty large number of models. And then again, over time, you say, well, that was actually a good one. And it goes, oh, okay, I'll adjust my model then to say that ones that look like this are now good. So I think in that inspection world, which then kind of goes directly to picking, right? So how do you pick it up? Do I need to come in like this, or we'll start getting kind of feeding that data to the robot. But again, the robot's not doing the AI. It's the camera really that's doing the AI. So that's my opinion, at least.
Hey, what are your thoughts?
I would agree. I think that we will continue to see more and more uses of synthetic data. The concept of putting artificial intelligence in robotic arms or PLCs is a little too Skynet for me at this point. So I for one, am almost happy that it's vision cameras and some other brain going and controlling it. I have seen some of the early applications in person at trade shows and other things, and they seem interesting. I haven't seen a lot of one for one applications of we'll go pick different things out of this bin that the vast majority of groups are going to immediately translate. So as I feel like I'm almost a broken record here, Sean, talking about artificial intelligence, saying for me it's exciting. I think that there are some interesting applications that we can see today and into the future. There are a lot of the applications that are very much just scratching the surface, and I think most groups are reasonably some number of years away from using the vast majority of applications, and probably more years away from the point of, hey, can this go solve a lot of our problems? And I've had a number of those conversations with people saying, hey, our executives have used ChatGPT. Someone somewhere put in their head that AI is going to solve all of our problems. Will it solve all of our problems? How can we go figure out how we can reasonably use AI? I think it's got the opportunity to go solve some labor issues. We talked a bit about labor earlier. I think that it is difficult and will continue to be difficult to go find people to do some of these jobs. I think the labor issues and shortages that we've seen for the last 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, our entire lifetimes will not suddenly go away. So whether it be robotic arms or conveyors or other tools, removing a lot of that manual process. I think that at some point people are going to realize they need to go spend some money and move in that direction. Moving in a slightly different direction, we've got a question and comment from Jeff in the comments talking about, with the ease of use of low code, no code coming, does it make implementation for a DIY solution for the end users and less need for the integrators? I think it's a good question for Jeff, and I know low code is very kind of near and dear to Sean's heart, and so I wanted to go bring it up and get your perspective after you spent a bunch of time working towards low code, no code.
Yeah. So, for some people who don't know, after I left R&D, I teamed up with a partner, and we were looking at low code, drag and drop, basically replacement for ladder logic PLC. Again, for the lower end, we weren't looking to try to replace a PLC in a multi-million-dollar cell. We were looking at these small little operations where you're just dispensing or you're just screw driving, where you've got maybe a couple dozen IO points. Real simple things. Started a startup, got a prototype, went to go start pitching to VCs, and that's when Silicon Valley Bank, took a dump, and pretty much all the VCs said, we love the idea, but we're not giving anybody money right now. So kind of put that on the back burner, a little bit. It's still out there. It's still something I think about. But to answer Jeff's question, that's part of the reason why we looked at doing that, is alluding to what I said before, is like, during the pandemic, when we didn't have enough integrators to do the work, right? The only way to be able to do that is either get more integrators or allow end users to do the work themselves and not have to go to an integrator. Now, certain things are always going to have to go to integrator for, but small little things like, picking and placing into an ultrasonic welder, welding it and picking out of it. That's a really simple, application. Why can't manufacturers do that themselves? Well, a lot of times they have the ability to do the mechanical. They can source the robot, they can build a frame, they can do the tooling, they can talk to the ultrasonic welder guy and get that and all. And then they get to the PLC, and they have no PLC people. They have to go, get a third party, or they go back to an integrator. Why can't we make this simpler, right? And so that's why I thought, having this low code, no code, ability would allow some manufacturers to start automating themselves, which quite honestly is good for the entire industry, because if they start doing it themselves on small projects, they'll see the benefit, and then they'll, let's go automate that next bigger thing. But then they may go like, all right, but that's a little out of our realm. Let's go hire an integrator to do it. But now we're comfortable with automation. We know what it can do, right? Where, an integrator might not be interested in their $50,000 project. They could do that in-house. but the integrator is certainly going to be interested in their 250, 300 million, plus dollar project. So I think it's just good overall for the entire industry if we can make things simpler to use. And for the reasons I said before, just being able to push out code quicker from an integrator standpoint. If you can code faster, debug faster, it's good for everybody. It allows the integrator to get off the floor, get paid faster. The customer has quicker lead time. Their ROI is faster. Everybody's happy.
If I can maybe piggyback on your comments, Sean, and I think, from what I've seen in the industry, at least as an integrator, it is quite it's a big chunk of your project's time to integrate a very custom machine. So I think my perspective is that there's absolutely an opportunity to shorten that time that would benefit, I guess, on both sides. But without, I guess, sugarcoating, I think, like, yes, it eliminates some of the work that integrators would have been doing otherwise, but in an effort that, let's say if you have and again, I'm throwing numbers, if you have a robotic arm that costs 70K and then it takes 200,000 to integrate that as a palletizer, and if you can make that, I guess, take less time to build out, now that same cell is, let's call it 70K plus 100K, well, then it's a lot easier for the end user to say yes, but also obviously reduces some of those hours on the integrator side because it's now easier, right? So I think, like, that's the reality of automation that I think few people talk about, because it does need, like, the money needs to come from somewhere, right? So at the end of the day, I think it does shorten those integration hours from my perspective.
Absolutely. Totally agree. I mean, there's so many examples of, and I know I'm making this a little bit simpler, but you go and install a smart Wi-Fi switch or a door lock or any kind of Wi-Fi enabled device nowadays. Most of the time you have an iPhone or an Android app that just walks you through. And it can even, I've seen some fairly complicated devices, but it walks you through and says, all right, now set this. Now do you, what choice do you want here? Do you want this? Do you want, and it just, my grandmother could program this thing, right? It doesn't require explicit knowledge, on how to do some of these things. I just think we could make it a lot simpler. And I've seen a few companies out there that have actually done it. I think a decent. I'll give a shout. There's one robot. I don't like naming names, but there's a robot company out there who basically has a slimmed down version of their programming software, and it doesn't do everything. But it's just, hey, I want to go pick and place, and it's just a drag and drop. I want to pick and place from here to here. Okay, and then I want to open my gripper, and then I want to do this, and it's very, very simple to do. The unfortunate part is you get about 80%, and you're like, now I want to do something custom, and I can't quite do it. Now you got to write some custom code, but it's getting there at least. I see the progression.
Absolutely. I would say I agree with that, and I see a lot of the low no-code tools being used by integrators or other service groups so that they can reduce the number of hours it takes to go through the process of going and building. That is what I've seen kind of time and time again. Let me ask Sean a question, because I would love if end user, like large portions of end users, have the time and resources and capabilities to go deploy some of these, small to medium-sized projects. What percentage of groups that you see or work with would have the extra resources to go ahead and be able to do that? And I ask the question having said the vast majority of groups that I work with don't typically have the extra internal resources to do. I would say probably maybe as high as 20% of the groups that I have would have a resource or two that are going to go work on these projects. On a most recent project, I think we signed the agreement on Thursday, and I was guaranteed 3 resources. And by the time we showed up on Monday morning, I had lost like 2.75 of those resources, of the 3 guaranteed resources that were end user resources from the project. So I'd love to get your perspective on that, please.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. A vast majority do not. I think 20% is probably being gracious, to be honest with you. It's probably 10% of the companies out there that really have resources to do this. It's funny to argue the opposite side. When I was an integrator, I used to, people were saying, well, we're going to work on this internally. And I said, what's your title? Manufacturing engineer. I'm like, and they pay you, for 40 hours of manufacturing engineering, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So when are you going to do this automation project? Right? It's like magic. You're going to do this in your spare time for free?
Yep.
So unless there's a dedicated resource, these projects either don't get done or they take forever, right?
Yes.
I have seen, there are companies out there, I'm sure you've run into them as well, that do have some dedicated, I'm going to call it automation, or at least, manufacturing equipment related groups. For those, and they typically are larger, companies. For those companies, though, they definitely could take advantage of that. And they could do those smaller projects of, for example, taking a robot and putting it on a grinder. Now, they already got a grinder and a human's loading this grinder. Let's just throw a robot, a feeder bowl that picks up the part, puts it into the grinder, and pulls it out. Simple little projects like that quite honestly, a small integrator, a very small integrator might be interested in, but a lot of them are like, I got to interface with your equipment on your floor. It's really not too exciting to me. I'd rather just build an entire cell for you. That would allow them to do those small projects and then, again, work with integrators on these larger projects. And then I think if that's the case, if you had these tools that were easier to use, I think you'd see that 10% number maybe start growing, a little bit more to closer to 20 or 25 or who knows, It depends on the structure of your business. I wouldn't recommend it for all businesses, but certainly some could benefit from it.
I think it's also, like Sean, to add again, to your point, I think it's not also just about the project, but it's sort of about the ongoing support, right? If you equip those people with the tools where they can just tweak a little thing, or they can rearrange, a piece of that code and, make it work. Because I've never deployed a project in a factory where, whatever it was done by, let's call it a certain deadline, it just never changes, right? It requires some,
right.
I like to use the word massaging, but let's say tweaking over the time. So I think people appreciate that a lot more if
absolutely. They can. Absolutely. We did a project years ago where they had it was buffing a part that had cylindrical and a hex and other and all these parts. They could be longer, shorter, bigger, thicker, hundreds of SKUs. And trying to program those SKUs, all those SKUs, was going to take massive amounts of time. So what we said is look, we'll program 5 of them, but we're going to build you a system where basically you had a generic drawing with dimensions A, B, C, D, and you put in what is A, what is B, what is C, so they could go in and create a new recipe graphically to run a new part whenever that new part came down, production line, which might not be for a year, right? Why program it now if you're not going to run it for a year? They could then come in and program it, and just by offsets on the robot, it buffed this part, right? So to me, that's kind of an example of the no code. They were able to program a new part without knowing any code. All they did was just take the drawing or calipers, measure the part, and put the numbers in the HMI, and boom, now you had a new recipe, right? And so then they didn't have to call us, hey, can you come program this new part? So it took a little extra money to build. Yep. It took some extra money to build that, but then we kind of took that example and we used it on other projects as well, where customers could go in and build recipes on the fly on their HMI.
I like that example. Dave, thoughts?
Absolutely. I agree with that. I think that's a fantastic example. What I typically run into, Sean, is the people who are programming this don't really want to program 100 or 1,000 of the exact same part that are slightly different, especially knowing that by 18 months from now, when they go to run the part, one of the dimensions will have changed. And end users don't want to say, yes, here's $1 million. Please go program all 150 or 1,000 parts. And I will see you in 18 months when this is done. So I think that is a really good example of how it solves kind of basically everyone's problems, and then someone at the facility hopefully remembers how to do it when the next new part comes down the line. Otherwise, you get a call saying, Sean, why is my part only 92% of the way buffed? But no, I 100% agree. I think that is a great example. I'm going to use this as a segue to what kind of you, Sean, and what we think are some interesting business opportunities for people in automation or manufacturing in 2024. And you talked a little bit about venture capital money I know that you spent some time working with VCs and PEs. Can you, and you shared what, like a year, 18 months ago when Silicon Valley Bank failed, how everything kind of, we hit the brakes on everything. Can you give us a little bit of an update? Is it still harder to get VC money in manufacturing today? What does that landscape look like?
Yeah, I mean, now, granted, I'm a bit of an outsider here. I'm not working for, or I'm not doing a startup right now, but I talk to enough of them, to have a little bit of a knowledge here. I'd say it's the more ambitious your idea is, it seems like the easier it is to get some money. Everybody, VC, they're looking for the next unicorn, the next Google, the next $1 billion company. And that's how they're placing their bets, right? Private equity is looking for the firm, stable, nice EBITDA, but maybe got a few problems that they know how to go in and correct so that they can, increase the bottom line. Very cautious, I've said this before. I wrote an article on it even. I think there's room in between, though. I think there needs to be something between VC and private equity where you could go into a company that maybe is doing well, but maybe it's not attractive to private equity. But by putting some money into it, you could really boost this company by changing the way they do things. I mean, for a good way. You have to have a plan going in, right? Not just buying companies and kind of smashing them together. I mean, there's several private equity firms out there that are buying multiple integrators. You've seen, we won't name names, but you've seen them all out there. There's 4 or 5 big ones out there that are putting them all together. Some are doing it better than others, in my opinion. But I still don't necessarily see a really good synergy for all of these. You got to get the 1 + 1 = 3 out of it, right? And I'm seeing 1 + 1 = 2.1 out of it. It just doesn't seem like it's really gelling as much as it could. Hardware seems to be harder to raise money for than software. Software has always been easier because I know it's simplified. You write it once and sell it 1,000,000 times, whereas hardware, you design it 1,000,000 times and and get it right, and then sell it 1, right? So, hardware is harder. I really think there's opportunities for standardization. More off the shelf automation that is. I'm going to call engineered to order. It's not custom, but it's also not exactly standard. But let's just say 80 to 90% of it is pretty standardized. And then you're just optimizing changing that last 10% to fit the product, right? This is an idea I've shared with people before, is just small little cells of, you've got an adhesive dispensing cell, a welding cell, a screw driving cell, a whatever. And it kind of it's a 1-for-1 person I don't want to say replacement, 1-for-1 person transfer. What's the word I'm looking for? I'm going to say replacement, even though we know we're not replacing people. We're moving them into other jobs. We all know that. But it takes the task away from that person, right? So that, I think those are some of those opportunities. It's really it's standardizing some of this. I really think that we complicate things a little too much sometimes. As engineers, we try to reinvent the wheel all the time, and you've really got to pull the engineers back in sometimes and say, guys, no, we've done this before this way. Let's keep doing it that way. Let's not try to go make this thing crazy again. So standardized platforms, standardized products. I think those are really important to the future.
Let me ask you, I guess, on that last point of reinventing the wheel. Look,
could it be square? That's what Vlad wants to know, or octagonal. What shape would you like to make the wheel, Vlad?
Exactly, but let me I'm gonna lead into it. So I think, look, obviously the cells idea I think is great, but that's a very capital intensive business. I'm not sure, that is something I would go into tomorrow. So looking maybe at systems integration, would you do it differently than the current players on the market, or do you think it's a very sort of like known model? If let's say if like Vlad was to go and do systems integration tomorrow, he'd go in and sell end users on programming PLCs, HMIs, SCADA systems, and then just kind of expand
Mhm.
following the very traditional, let's say, proven model? Or is there an opportunity maybe to do things differently in a way?
Um, and when you say system integration, what I've learned over the years, integration means a lot of different things to different people,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
But I think what you're talking about is more kind of service oriented
Yes.
programming and design, things like that. Yeah. Um, I mean, there are some very large companies out there that are doing very well at that. To me, it's tough in my opinion, it's tough to scale that business because it is capped by labor, right? You can only get so many hours out of a programmer. Now, that being said, I think standardization works in that realm as well, because if you develop a SCADA system or you develop some sort of software for somebody, rather than moving on to the next customer and doing something else completely custom, I would say go find every customer in the world that could use that same piece of code or that same application that you designed, maybe with a few tweaks, and sell it to all those people, right? So now you've got a standard piece of software at that point.
Mhm.
Yeah, you're still doing some custom stuff, and really the analogy is very similar to machinery manufacturers. What I did is we came up with some machines. We build a machine and go like, you know what? I can take that machine and sell it to somebody else with just a few tweaks. So let's redesign it a little bit so that the standard platform is universal for everybody. But then we just change the tooling, right? So now I don't have to 50%, 60% of the design I don't touch. I just use the same thing on every customer, right? Then the other 40%, yes, that's custom to their application. So I think the same ideas can apply both to machine building and to integration as you're talking about, because without it, it's the same thing. You run out of labor, it's the same thing. We run out of labor. Engineers can only design so much per week, so you can't pump out more machines unless you can just say, yep, this design is done, send it to manufacturing. I don't have to redesign it at that point.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point, right? Like, again, I think it probably is a challenge to find those replicable sort of like software applications, especially
Mhm.
in the realm of like PLCs and SCADA systems,
Mhm.
because I know there's very custom developments everywhere.
Oh, sure,
But yeah, that's
sure.
something to.
We didn't run into, I mean, in machines, a vast majority of the projects weren't something we could turn into a standard. But you do run into those, and you're like, wait, no, this is one that we can standardize on, right? And then we would turn it into a standardized platform. So I think the same thing, like you said, SCADA systems, yes, they're all going to be slightly unique and all, but perhaps there's some underlying base code, 50% of that base code that you can reuse every single time, maybe, right? And then just customize the other 50%. Just as opposed to going in with a clean sheet of paper or a clean screen every single time.
Gotcha. Let me ask you, I guess, like, did you purposefully look for that, or was that more of like, hey, we have something that might be used elsewhere. Let me make a few phone calls to see if somebody else would pay for it. Like, I guess,
Yeah,
like, I'm curious because
it was a little bit of both. It started with a system that we did for a hydraulic valve manufacturer that used a powered free pallet, a Bosch pallet system, that went around and went from station to station. And then we did another machine for somebody else doing irrigation valves. So it was very, again, I was like, hey, we did hydraulic valves, we could do irrigation valves. It's just, they're similar. It's a pop and a spring and O-ring, different sizes and shapes, but it's all the same concepts, right? We used a linear motor system, and then those became better and better and better over the years. So we used the better linear motor system and then the better one, and then we said, well, wait a minute, we could design these little modules that are just a meter long with a meter stick of these things, and then just bolt them together. Like, do we need 1 bay, 2 bays, 3 bays, 4 bays? Tooling plates where you could mount robots, where you could mount feeder bowls, and again, every station was somewhat unique. But the frame structure, the pneumatics, the distribution, the IO distribution blocks, the linear motor section, all that pre-engineered, pre-designed, we could say, oh, it's a 6 bay system, release 6 bays. Done. I mean, literally within an hour. Done. Now we can work on all the custom side of the project, right? So it was one of those, kind of iterative, but then like we were iterating towards a solution, and it kind of came over the years like, hey, wait, this is a good way to do this, have a standard, and we did that for multiple products as well. Some of our dial machines the same way. We're not going to make you a 36.5-inch dial. No, it's a small, medium, large, and extra large. And if it doesn't fit in the large, you're going to get an extra large. I'm sorry. We're not going to make this completely custom to you. Your machine's going to be 2 inches bigger. Oh, it can't be 2 inches bigger. Okay, fine. It'll be an extra $100,000. 2 inches is fine. That's good, right? Customers will, I've learned, don't ask the customer exactly what they want. Tell them, here are the solutions. Give them something to choose from, and they'll choose one of those. If you ask them exactly what they want, they'll want something that's purple, that is, 36.1 inches big, and they'll go crazy with their demands, as opposed to saying, yes, I can accept one of your standard, quote unquote, standard pieces of equipment.
Gotcha. Appreciate that. Dave?
I would absolutely agree with Sean. If you are looking at starting or expanding a business, I would not build something that is based only on, I have to go sell more hours in order to make money. And then at some point, I've got to go hire more people in order to make some portion of that amount of money for the company. I don't personally find that sustainable, but especially Vlad and probably all longtime listeners have heard me say that at least a dozen or more times over the years. Sean, this has been a super awesome question. Before we get to the final questions that we ask all the guests, I did warn you that I want to ask you potentially the most explosive question that I've asked anyone here on Manufacturing Hub. Is Southwest Airlines, you're in my maybe airline of choice still, is moving from open seating, which they've done since, 50 years or 55 years at this point, to allegedly going to assigned seats. I want to get your thoughts. I want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I've always said, Southwest is a very, it's like religion and politics. It's very divisive. You either love it or hate it, right? I'm near I think part of this too, if you're near a hub, right, and you fly to those hubs, and I happen to do that. I think you do as well. I've never had a problem with it, right? I've always liked it. Now, granted, I fly enough that I'm usually A1 through 15, and I get pretty much any seat that I want. I usually go back to the emergency row, get my aisle. I'm good. I'm a tall guy, so I like to have the extra leg room. I read that they said 80% of their customers, preferred assigned seats. I think that's probably because 80% of their customers are casual flyers that don't fly them a lot. If they talk to the 20% of the loyal flyers, they would probably say, no, we like it the other way. However, if 80% of your business is coming from those people, then I guess you need to cater, to what they want. Is it the end of the world? No, of course not. Every other airline does it. I just hope that they do reward the loyal flyers with some sort of, we get first choice of emergency row for free, or we get first choice of, whatever. We get some sort of perk, to go along with it. I am still amazed, though, that even to this day, I flew Southwest this weekend, and I'm sitting in, 14B, is the seat. I guess was a B. I don't know. What about Iowa? 14th seat. And this woman walked up, and she's like, "You're in my seat." And I said, "Excuse me?" She's like, "Yeah, I'm 14C." And I said, "No, ma'am. You're number 14 in the C group. You can sit anywhere you want." And she's like, "But I want to sit there." And I'm like, "Yeah, but I was here first." So it amazes me that still happens almost every flight to somebody.
I feel like that would be me, because I've not been in that system. That seems very confusing.
I would say I agree, not even with that, but having flown like semi-professionally for a large part of the last decade, just people who don't live in airports, who don't live in travel, and how everything is new. I just wish the TSA agents would record the things they need to say and just play them on loop via a personal tape recorder. I really don't know how we haven't gotten to that point, and they still have to tell people to take their shoes off or not take their shoes off every time. I find that funny. I think it'll be interesting. Yeah. I think Southwest had there was lots of benefit, as I've said, of if a meeting gets done early or runs late and there's an earlier or later flight, being able to change and still being able to get a good seat. As I've told Sean, if my meeting ends early, the odds of me sitting in a middle seat for anything over, I don't know, 60 minutes or 90 minutes is almost a 0% chance, right? So if the question is get home later in a seat that is an okay seat, or get home earlier in a worse seat, I'm probably not going to take the worst seat. I will be interested to see if they go add some more leg room. I've heard tell of premium seating. I am not quite as tall as Sean, and my preferred seat is 4C. But having said that, it would be nice, especially for some of those longer cross country or other flights, to be able to get some additional leg room. We flew to Beth and I flew to Hawaii last year, and those were very long flights. Both of the 4+ hour legs on both sides of it, they were all just very long flights, and no amount of anything could make up for the fact that I just really wanted 3 more inches of leg room, so my knees could not be pressed up against the seat in front of me.
I'm hoping they come up with some sort of A+ or something seating where you can either pay a little bit more, or if you've got enough points, you automatically get upgraded to that or something.
Absolutely. I think it will be interesting. As I've said, if they're basically lumping themselves into, now we're like every other airline, the price is also basically to the point of they're like every other airline.
Exactly.
So it'll be interesting to see how they differentiate, especially for people. Yeah, especially for everyone else. So absolutely. That will be interesting. Sean, I'm going to ask you my most favorite question that I get to ask all of our guests, and to predict the future. So we'd absolutely like to ask you, what do you think that the future of the industry is going to look like? Be it the AI stuff or the robotic stuff or these new businesses? How do you see the industry changing in the next 3 to 5 years?
So I think we're going to be driving down cost of robotics just by the sheer number of robot companies. I mean, we walked around Automate, and the joke was there was 27 new cobot companies that had never been there before. Don't quote me on that 27, but it was a large number. 25 of them will probably be out of business, but there is more competition, right? So I think we're going to have to drive down the cost of robotics, which will hopefully increase the adoption of robotics. The AI stuff, it'll continue to help. We'll have AI picking solutions and kind of the stuff we talked about before, optimization of layers and things like that. I don't see it getting down into the robot or PLC anytime reasonably soon. Maybe on the front end, maybe there'll be some PLC code optimization or some AI that kind of says, it looks like you're trying to create a PID loop, and it kind of helps you, almost like the Google autocomplete. It kind of auto completes for you. That's that sort of thing. I think we'll start to see some of that maybe. The consolidation in the machine builder space. M&A is still, very, very hot right now. There was 2 or 3 announcements just in the last week of more companies being bought. When that happens, typically they become larger organizations. It becomes harder for them maybe to do some of the smaller projects, which creates a little bit of a void for smaller up and coming organizations, right? That's just the natural. It's like, the forest grows up and burns down, and then the smaller seeds come up. It's a natural progression of the business. So we're going to see that continue to happen. Definitely consolidation. We're going to see some pretty large organizations of 5, 10, maybe even 15, separate companies. We'll see, the ones that are successful and the ones that are not. There'll be winners and losers there too. What else?
What do you see on the reshoring side? I think that's been a big conversation topic. I'm not sure if you're seeing true progress on that side.
I saw a lot of talk about it in a little bit of action towards the end of the pandemic over the last, but it seems to be slowed down a lot. And I think, part of that is, the interest rates are higher now. There's, geopolitical instability right now. Which quite honestly is a reason to onshore. But I haven't seen it move as fast as people talked about it before. The CHIPS Act, they're, hey, we're going to build chips in America. Great. They've started these plants, but then I've heard a few of the plants have slowed way down. A couple of them have gotten, scaled back. Maybe they're not going to, build as large of a plant here in the U.S. as they were going to. So unfortunately, as with a lot of things in the United States, we talk about doing these grandiose things, and then we kind of lose our steam, and we kind of end up doing them mediocre, or we don't do them at all. So yeah, I don't see the reshoring effort as strong as what they talked about it was maybe a couple years ago.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, because we need it. I've always said you could build a television in the United States as cheap as you could in China. You just have to automate it all, but nobody's willing to do that because I can go buy a TV for $100, in China. So.
And it would be expensive to put together a factory large enough and automated enough to go build a TV for $300 for Black Friday or $500 for Black Friday. So I think that would absolutely be difficult. I've heard a little. I hear some of them moving forward, but certainly not with as much steam as 3, 4, 5 years ago. Hopefully we see some of those come back and some of those facilities get built. I think that would all be good and very important.
Would be nice. Yeah.
Absolutely. Sean, let me ask you for some career advice. Now, historically, we've asked you for kind of early to mid people, but if someone is watching and looking to start their own company, what's other than all of the amazing advice and experiences that you gave earlier, what's the best piece of advice you have for them?
Oh boy. Tenacity, you have to be 100% in this industry. You've got to be willing to put in, literally 70, 80 hours a week. When I first started our company, we'd go in and design, and I was turning wrenches. I went from running a $50 million division to turning a wrench in a bay, just because that's what was required when we first started this company. And then I'd go home at night and I'd spend all night on LinkedIn and Google Maps looking at industrial parks, trying to identify potential customers and things like that I could reach out to, and emailing all night long. So, it takes a lot of work. Don't be afraid with your customers to ask for the PO. Too many people are shy of doing that. This is a sales tactic I've used before, especially with customers that you've been working with for a while and they're just not, they keep putting it off. You don't know why. Sit down and just go, what is the reason you are not giving me this PO? What is the one reason that you're not giving this PO, right? Is it, don't even give them these ideas, just listen. But is it, they don't have the money, and by the way, it's never the money. They're afraid of making a mistake. They don't have the power to do it. They have to get their boss's approval, right? Whatever that is, at least you've narrowed it down to, okay, about the money. Okay, why is it about the money? Let's talk about that. Oh, you're afraid. Okay, so what is it that I could do, to make you feel better about this? Oh, you're not the right person. Okay, well, who is the right person? Can I go talk to them? So, just be, always asking, why are you not placing this order? And sometimes you get to the point where they don't have a reason necessarily, or it's a reason that you can't overcome for some reason, right? I don't know, their CFO is on a 6-month vacation and he's the guy who's going to sign off. Okay, fine. Then I'll call you in 6 months, right? So, but move on to the next customer at that point. Don't keep wasting time with that customer that's just going to hem and haw all the time. And I guess the last thing is, don't be afraid to network, even with people that you think are your competitors. When I first got into this business, I saw everybody as my competitor, right? Oh, they build machines, they must be a competitor, right? And I was very protective, and I quickly learned, especially after I started going to things like A3 and Automate and all those. I very quickly, and we're going back 20 years now, I very quickly learned that, no, we all have our niches, and there's really the Venn diagram of competition is very, very small, for most people. Yes, there are competitors out there, of course, there's not as many as you think. So start working with those other guys who maybe are specializing in automotive and you're specializing in food and beverage, and you can share ideas. Don't be afraid to sit down and call them up and go like, hey, how do you handle your CAD revisions? How do you handle problem employees? How do you find controls programmers? How do you, they're usually, most business owners are happy to share their experiences with you. So don't be afraid to ask questions.
Absolutely. I think all of those are really, really great pieces of advice. Thank you so much for that, Sean. I know you've got a book and a podcast recommendation for us today.
Yeah. So the book recommendation actually is one that was recommended to me, and I'll be honest with you, I just started it, but I'm really enjoying it. It's called From Strength to Strength. And the subtitle is Finding Success, Happiness, and Deep Purpose in the Second Half of Life, which kind of is a little depressing because, I don't want to consider this my second half of life, but I did just turn 50. So I guess theoretically, this is technically my second half of life, unless I live to 101. But it's more, it's not necessarily, it's your second act, right? Because a lot of us go through, we have a career, and we might, go from company to company, but then at some point, not everybody, but some people make a big career shift. So for me, it was, selling my company that had been, everything for 20 years, pretty much, pretty much almost my whole career. And now shifting into something new. So there's sometimes where when you do that new, you don't know what you want to be when you grow up because you've grown up being that, and now you're trying to be something different. It's a really interesting book on, people who want to maybe not necessarily reinvent themselves, but just kind of self-reflect upon, what has changed. There's things now that that I used to do that I don't want to do anymore. Yeah. People have told me like, hey, I will pay you a crap ton of money to come sell for me, to be one of our sales guys. I'm like, I have zero interest in selling. I'm not sure you can pay me enough money to come sell. I just don't really enjoy it. I'm good at it, but I just don't enjoy it. Right. So I've learned that about myself. And so I just, say thank you, but no thank you. So anyway, that's the book recommendation. So I'm only part way through it, and hopefully it stays as good as it has been so far. And the podcast, it's been out for a little while. It's actually been out for a couple of years, but I only found it probably about a year ago, and I've just been devouring all of them. It's called Acquired. It's basically two guys that have been in the venture capital investment space for a while, but they do deep dives. I mean, we're talking about like a 4-hour long podcast on large companies, on Costco, Microsoft. They did one on Nintendo. They did one on, Nike. They dig down from the very, very beginning till where they are now. And then they actually analyze the company at the end and talk about what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, why have they become to power, what who could possibly displace them as the next leader in that industry. Really, really entertaining. Long form podcasts. If you don't have the attention span for a 4-hour podcast, not for you. If you really want to learn everything possible, I think Microsoft had a 2-part, so it was like 8 hours long. If you want to learn everything about Microsoft,
because is that about the acquisitions that those companies make?
Yeah, it's really not. Which it doesn't. I early on, because both these guys are in that M&A space and venture capital space. I think they started it and they called it Acquired. To be honest with you, you're exactly. I kind of asked myself the same question. I'm like, this really isn't named correctly. But hey, the name stuck. They're very successful. They do a great job at it. Very entertaining. The two hosts. So definitely, if you're kind of a tech/business nerd, you definitely, I think, would enjoy it.
Excellent.
Very cool.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you for both of those. And just one point to Sean's earlier book, as I have said in the past, I think it's very important to find happiness outside of any sort of job. If your job is your life and your job is your source of happiness, you're going to struggle whether you leave that job or the job has left you behind, or you retire, any of those sort of things. So finding happiness as a person, not as a title on a business card, is extremely important.
Yeah. It's finding you gotta find your purpose, right? And if that purpose is another job that you enjoy, then that's great, right? But you gotta have that purpose.
Absolutely. No, Sean, last question for you is how can our listeners help? Who should reach out? Who are you looking to connect with? Other than not wanting to be a sales guy, are you looking for opportunities? Are you looking to assumably not hire employees, but very much kind of your open,
right.
Your open forum to ask our listeners anything that they can do to help you?
Yeah. I've through my company Automation AMA, I do coaching and help businesses, look at their processes and, I call it the good, the bad, the ugly. Hey, you're doing this really well. You're doing this pretty good. And oh my gosh, why are you not doing this? There's either a great opportunity here or, I've run into some companies, for example, that, they're not tracking the progress of their projects until it's over. They don't know if they made money until the project's over. I'm like, oh my gosh, no, you've got to be tracking it as you go along. And I show them tools and ways, to do that. So companies that, maybe just need a sounding board, maybe want some ideas, whether it be from, a board level or just a strategic advisory level, things like that. Those are things that I can help out with. If people ask me what I want to do, I'd love to help a good company become great. And whether that's just, helping them out a few hours a week or, helping them out, 40 hours a week, helping them, run their business. I'm open to that as well. I'm blessed that I can be a little picky and choosy, and who I want to work with. But and the major thing is I'm in Florida, so I don't mind traveling, as we talked about, Southwest a lot. However, I'm not relocating to Michigan or Ohio. I live in Florida, and that's where I'm staying. So got to keep that in mind. I've had to turn down several opportunities because they wanted me to be, in somewhere near Detroit, and I said, well, thank you very much, but no, thank you.
Yeah, no, that's definitely the right life choice, Sean, via relocating just based upon my experience. Sean, this has been awesome. Thank you much. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you so much for hanging out in the comments and listening on podcast form. If you guys are somehow not connected to Sean, please make sure that you're connected to Sean and following Manufacturing Hub and Vlad and myself. If you guys have made it this far on podcast format, do the like, do the subscribe, do the share. We should have all of this information and links to all of us in the show notes if you guys are crazy people who click links in show notes like me. Until next week, we'll see everyone soon. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Sean. Thank you, everyone.
Yep. Always a pleasure.